50 degrees below zero, Fahrenheit. At that temperature, exposed human skin freezes solid in 5 minutes. Your lungs burn with every breath. Metal becomes brittle and shatters. And yet, this creature, weighing 6 tons, standing 13 feet tall, lived here, thrived here, for hundreds of thousands of years. Today, its closest living relative is the African elephant. If you took that elephant and placed it in negative 50-degree weather, it would be dead in 30 minutes. Hypothermia would shut down its brain before the first hour ended. So what changed? What did woolly mammoths have that their cousins lost? The answer isn't just thick fur. It's a symphony of biological engineering, microscopic adaptations that defy the normal rules of thermodynamics. Evolutionary innovations so specific, so perfectly calibrated to extreme cold, that when the Ice Age ended and the world warmed, they became a liability. This is the story of the most cold-adapted animal that ever walked the earth, and why we'll never see anything like it again. All mammals face the same fundamental problem. We generate heat internally through metabolism, but we lose heat to our environment constantly. And the rate of heat loss follows a brutal physical law. It's called the square cube law. As an animal gets bigger, its volume increases as a cube, but its surface area only increases as a square. Which means large animals have proportionally less surface area relative to their volume. This is why mice freeze to death quickly. They have enormous surface area relative to their tiny volume. They're hemorrhaging heat constantly. Elephants, on the other hand, have the opposite problem. In the African heat, they can't cool down fast enough. Their massive bodies generate heat through basic metabolism, but they don't have enough surface area to dump that heat. So they evolved enormous ears, not for hearing, for cooling. An African elephant's ears are thin sheets of skin filled with blood vessels. When they fan them, blood flowing through cools rapidly. It's a biological radiator. Now imagine taking that elephant, optimized for dumping heat, and dropping it into negative 50 degrees. Those massive ears become heat-draining liabilities. Every square inch is bleeding warmth into the frozen air. The elephant would burn through its energy reserves trying to generate enough heat to compensate. Within minutes, its core temperature would drop. Shivering would begin, a last desperate attempt to generate warmth through muscle contractions. But shivering burns even more energy, a death spiral. Woolly mammoths solved this problem. Their ears were tiny, less than a foot long. Not because they didn't need to hear, but because every square inch of surface area was a potential point of heat loss. And in the Ice Age, heat was more valuable than gold. When you picture mammoth fur, you probably imagine something like a sheep, thick and woolly. You'd be partly right, but the real innovation is invisible to the naked eye. Mammoth fur wasn't one type of hair. It was 3 distinct layers, each engineered for a specific purpose. Layer 1, the underfur, short, fine, and incredibly dense, up to 10,000 hairs per square inch. Each hair had a crimped, wavy structure, like a microscopic spring. This structure trapped air in tiny pockets, still air. And still air is one of the best insulators in nature. Why? Because heat transfer requires molecular movement. When air can't circulate, convection stops. Heat stays trapped against the skin. This created a microclimate, a warm zone immediately against the mammoth's skin, even when the outside air was 50 below. Layer 2, the wool layer, longer and thicker than the underfur, but still crimped, still trapping air. This layer was coated in natural oils, lanolin, which made it water-resistant. Why does that matter in a frozen wasteland? Because the mammoth's own body heat created moisture through breathing and minor sweating. If that moisture penetrated the fur and froze, the ice would fill those critical air pockets, the insulation would collapse, death would follow. The oily wool layer prevented this. Moisture was wicked away before it could freeze. Layer 3, the guard hairs. These were the hairs you'd see, long, up to 3 feet, coarse and straight. They looked like they were just for show. They weren't. They were wind armor. In a blizzard, wind doesn't just feel cold. It actively strips away heat by forcing air movement against your skin. The guard hairs created a barrier. Wind flowed over them, but couldn't penetrate to the insulating layers beneath. It's the same principle as a windbreaker jacket. The outer layer doesn't need to be warm, it just needs to block air movement. Modern elephants have hair, but it's nothing like this. Sparse, only a few hundred hairs per square inch, not 10,000. Simple straight structure, no crimp, no air trapping, no layering system. In thermal imaging, a mammoth would appear cold on the outside because the heat never escaped the fur barrier. An African elephant would glow like a bonfire, hemorrhaging heat it couldn't afford to lose. But even perfect fur can't solve every problem. Blood has to flow to the legs, the trunk, the tail. And blood carries heat, so every time warm blood flows from the core to the extremities, it risks losing that heat to the frozen environment. Mammoths solved this with countercurrent heat exchange. In their legs, arteries and veins ran side by side, almost touching. As warm arterial blood flowed down toward the feet, it passed cool venous blood flowing back up. Heat transferred across the thin vessel walls. The outgoing blood cooled before reaching the extremities. The returning blood warmed before reaching the core. This meant the mammoth's feet could be at near freezing temperatures, while its core remained warm. No wasted heat lost to the environment. If you could see a mammoth in thermal imaging, you'd see a gradient. Hot core, warm upper legs, cool lower legs, cold feet. Their feet could operate at just a few degrees above freezing, cold enough that ice wouldn't melt under them. A human foot at that temperature would be gangrenous within hours, but mammoth tissue was adapted. Their cells produced antifreeze proteins, molecules that prevented ice crystal formation inside cells. The same proteins Arctic fish use to survive in sub-freezing ocean water. Modern elephants don't have this. Their blood vessels aren't arranged for heat conservation, they're arranged for heat dumping. Because in Africa, keeping your feet cool is survival. Hot ground, scorching sand. The worst thing that could happen is heat building up in your extremities. So elephant circulation is designed to distribute heat evenly, keep everything the same temperature. Perfect for the savanna, fatal in the Ice Age. But the most important adaptation wasn't visible from the outside. It was the furnace. A woolly mammoth ate up to 400 pounds of vegetation every single day. Not because it was particularly hungry, but because digestion generates heat. When bacteria in the gut break down plant fiber, they produce heat as a byproduct. It's called fermentation, the same process that makes compost piles steam in winter. A mammoth's gut was essentially a giant fermentation chamber, a biological furnace running 24 hours a day. This wasn't supplemental heat. This was the primary heat source. The mammoth's core temperature was maintained not by muscle metabolism, but by billions of bacteria digesting grass. This created a brutal requirement: never stop eating. If a mammoth went too long without food, if it couldn't find vegetation under the snow, the furnace would cool. Within 12 hours, its core temperature would start dropping. It would begin burning fat reserves for energy, but fat metabolism doesn't produce as much heat as fermentation. Within 24 hours, it would be in metabolic crisis, shivering, lethargic. 48 hours without food in negative 50-degree weather? Fatal.
This is why mammoths migrated constantly, following food sources, never staying in one place long enough to exhaust the vegetation. And it's why they lived in herds. More eyes to find food, shared knowledge of where grass was buried under snow. Modern elephants can fast. They rest during the hottest parts of the day, conserve energy. A mammoth couldn't afford that luxury. In the cold, rest meant death. The furnace had to keep burning. Even their trunks were adapted for this, shorter than an African elephant's trunk. Not for aesthetic reasons. Surface area. A long trunk has more surface area, more heat loss. Mammoths didn't need to reach high into trees. All their food was on the ground, buried under snow, so they evolved the shortest trunk that could still function, minimizing heat loss while maximizing feeding efficiency. 12,000 years ago, the Ice Age ended. The glaciers retreated, temperatures rose, and the mammoths' greatest adaptations became their downfall. That 3-layer fur system, perfect for negative 50, fatal at positive 50. They couldn't shed it fast enough, couldn't cool down. Meanwhile, elephants adapted to heat. With their large ears and efficient cooling systems, thrived in the new, warmer world. They spread north into territory mammoths once dominated. Scientists have sequenced mammoth DNA from frozen specimens. We've identified the exact genes responsible for cold adaptation, mutations in hemoglobin that helped blood carry oxygen in extreme cold, changes to fat metabolism genes, hair structure genes, producing that 3-layer system. Some researchers have proposed bringing mammoths back, using CRISPR gene editing to insert mammoth genes into Asian elephant embryos. Theoretically possible, but here's the question. Where would they live? The Arctic tundra is warming. The Ice Age environment they were engineered for doesn't exist anymore. A resurrected mammoth would be an evolutionary anachronism, perfectly adapted for a world that no longer exists. The woolly mammoth represents something profound. Evolution can create perfect solutions to specific problems, but those solutions are locked to their environments. When the environment changes faster than evolution can respond, even perfection becomes obsolete. The mammoths mastered cold like no animal before or since. They pushed the boundaries of what warm-blooded life could endure. And then the world changed, and they were gone.